You've probably noticed it. The version of you that exists at 11 p.m. is not the same person who made plans at 9 a.m. The 9 a.m. version signed up for the early gym class, committed to eating well, decided to have that difficult conversation. The 11 p.m. version is ordering food it doesn't need, avoiding the message it should send, and making small decisions it will quietly regret by morning. This isn't weakness. This isn't a character flaw. This is your brain running out of something, and the science of what that something is and what it costs you is stranger and more unsettling than most people realize. Let's start with a study that should have made headlines everywhere but somehow didn't. In 2011, researcher Shai Danziger published a study analyzing over 1,000 parole board decisions made by Israeli judges across a single day. The judges were experienced, the cases were serious, and the outcomes were, in theory, based entirely on the merits of each individual case. What Danziger found was that the single strongest predictor of whether a prisoner received parole wasn't the nature of their crime, their record, or their rehabilitation evidence. It was the time of day. Prisoners who appeared before the board right after a food break were granted parole around 65% of the time. Prisoners who appeared just before a break, after the judges had been deciding cases for hours without rest, were granted parole less than 10% of the time. Same judges, same legal standards. Wildly different outcomes depending purely on where in the day the case fell. The judges weren't corrupt. They weren't biased in any conscious way. They were depleted. And a depleted brain, it turns out, has a default setting. And that default setting is no. This is the core of what researchers call decision fatigue. The idea, developed significantly by psychologist Roy Baumeister, is that the mental resources required for decision-making are finite. Every choice you make across a day draws from the same limited pool. Early in the day, that pool is full. You weigh options carefully, consider nuance, tolerate uncertainty. As the day goes on, the pool drains. And as it drains, your brain doesn't simply make worse decisions, it does something more specific. It starts defaulting to whatever requires the least cognitive effort. For a judge, the least effort is denial. Keeping someone in prison doesn't require justification. Releasing them does. So a tired brain takes the path that demands the least from it, and someone who might have been paroled at 10 a.m. goes back to their cell at 4 p.m. Not because the judge decided differently, but because the judge barely decided at all. For you, the least effort default probably looks different. Maybe it's scrolling instead of sleeping. Maybe it's ordering takeout instead of cooking. Maybe it's avoiding the conversation you said you'd have. Maybe it's clicking yes on the cookie consent notice because reading it costs more than you have left. The brain late at night isn't making worse decisions in the same way it makes decisions in the morning. It's doing something different. It's largely stopped making decisions in the meaningful sense at all. It's pattern matching to whatever feels most immediately comfortable, most familiar, least threatening to whatever reserves it has left. Here is where it gets more specific and more uncomfortable. Neuroscientist Matthew Walker, who has spent decades studying sleep and brain function, has documented something striking about what happens to the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought, impulse control, long-term planning, and the ability to weigh consequences, as sleep deprivation or late-night fatigue accumulates. The prefrontal cortex goes offline first. Not the emotional centers, not the reward systems. Those stay active. In fact, without the prefrontal cortex regulating them, they become louder, more reactive, more easily triggered by immediate reward, immediate threat, immediate discomfort. What this means in practice is that the tired version of you isn't a more honest version. It isn't the real you that comes out when your guard is down. It's a version of you that has lost the part of the brain most responsible for being the person you actually want to be, and kept the parts most responsible for doing whatever feels good right now. This is why the fight at midnight lands differently than the fight at noon. The noon version of you can hold the complexity of the other person's perspective alongside your own frustration. The midnight version can only feel the frustration. The prefrontal cortex that lets you say, "I understand where they're coming from, even though I disagree," is the same one that's half asleep at midnight. What's left is the raw signal, the hurt, the anger, The need to be right, amplified, unfiltered, and dressed up as clarity. People often describe late-night arguments as feeling more honest, more real. They're not. They're less complete. They're what happens when the part of your brain that holds complexity and nuance goes to sleep before the rest of you does. And it doesn't stop at decisions and arguments. There is a growing body of research on what sleep deprivation and late-night cognitive depletion do to moral judgment specifically. Studies by Olga Kern and her colleagues have found that people are more likely to make morally questionable choices when cognitively depleted, not because their values change, but because acting in line with your values takes effort. It requires the prefrontal cortex to override an easier, more immediately satisfying impulse. When that override capacity is drained, the impulse wins more often. Not because you became a different person, because the part of you that helps you be who you want to be ran out of resources to do the job. This is not a small thing. This means that the person you are when you're tired is not a less defended version of your true self. It is a neurologically compromised version, one that is less capable of kindness, less capable of patience, less capable of resisting the things you said you didn't want, and less capable of doing the things you said you did. So what do you do with this? The first thing is to stop treating late-night decisions as if they carry the same weight as morning ones. The Israeli judge's study suggests that outcomes made under cognitive depletion are systematically skewed in ways the decision-maker isn't aware of and cannot self-correct for in the moment. Which means the rule, never send an email after 10 p.m., isn't just folk wisdom. It's neurologically sound advice. The second thing is to recognize that willpower is not a character trait. It's a resource. You don't run out of willpower because you're weak. You run out of it because you spent it. And like any resource, you can manage it. You can make important decisions earlier. You can reduce the number of low-stakes choices that drain the pool before you get to the ones that matter. You can build in rest not as a luxury, but as infrastructure. And the third thing, the one that requires the most from you, is to extend that understanding to everyone else too. The person who snapped at you at 9 p.m. might be someone who used up everything they had by the time you got to them. The person who made a decision that hurt you might have been working with a prefrontal cortex that had been depleted for hours before you walked in. This isn't an excuse. It's an explanation. And those are different things. The 11 p.m. version of you is real. It's you. But it is you with something missing. Something specific. Something biological. Something that will come back in the morning. The question is whether you make decisions that last longer than it's been gone.